So yeah, as like being a researcher for a long time, as quite a few of us, you pick up things along the way. The talk I'm going to give, I mean, you could easily talk for like an hour or two on that. So this will be super condensed, but in any case, afterwards we'll have time in the panel to discuss this in a bit more detail. And it's really basic things. Surprisingly, people get it wrong all the time. So this is really just a few hints on what are important when you're doing research. I'm going to start out with Heilmeyer's Catechism. You may not have heard of it. Heilmeyer was like a researcher. And well, the important thing is he was very meticulous and methodic about how to do research and formulated that in a set of questions you should ask yourself when you undertake research. And those are super basic. You think, how could you get this wrong? And still a lot of people don't do it right. So I quickly want to go through them. What problem do you want to solve? I mean, that seems totally obvious, and yet most of the time you may not have taken the time to fully understand the problem in all its complexity, right? You see something, a nice problem, a nice idea, you come up with a nice idea, you think you've understood the problem, you go ahead, and then halfway through you realize that actually you had overlooked something. And it's not as simple as it looked, or your idea doesn't actually fit the problem. Now, in research, this will happen all the time. There's no way to avoid it. But you can save yourself a lot of time later on when you think about the problem a little bit deeper before you start solving it. This is something where, like, spending a day or 2 or 3 more to really try to sort of understand the problem in all its scope and all the assumptions and all the details, it's just going to help you save so much time later on, where you don't have to go down that avenue where you realize your solution doesn't actually work and you've wasted a month or 2 trying to find a problem trying to find a solution to a problem that actually is a different kind of problem. Now, who cares about this problem and why? Well, in the end, you want to have impact. And what's important is to understand sort of not just what you solve, but whose problem does that solve, right? Who is interested in that and why are they interested in that? Again, it helps you to make sure that what you come up with a solution is useful. And that doesn't have to be industry. Of course, if it has practical impact, great. But if it's just sort of one step further on an academic problem, fair enough, right? It's just important to actually understand who would actually be interested in your solution. Again, worth spending a little bit of time on before you actually embark on developing your solutions. And of course, what's absolutely essential is you have to know your literature. You have to know what solutions are already out there and why are they not adequate? Why are they not sufficient? Why is there still something left that you need to solve? And you'd be surprised how many papers fail at this, right? How many papers just find another algorithm and it's yet another routing scheme. And it does the same thing as many others, and there are 50 you could compare against. There's no way you can do all of that anyway. So you just put it out there and compare against some that work less well than what you do. But in the end, it's totally useless. You've not advanced science because there were other solutions out there already that do the same thing and work as well as what you came up with. Now, of course, what is your proposed solution to the problem? Well, that you have to come up with yourself, and hopefully you're creative enough to do that. What's new about your approach? That is directly tied in with what solutions exist kind of questions, right? So again, it's something where it's super important to have it very clear. What do you do differently, and why is that useful? Now, the rest is more obvious, but those first 5, and especially what problem you want to solve, what solutions exist, and what's new about your approach, those are absolutely essential. It's worth spending time on that. If you ever want to do really good research, you better have very, very good answers to those questions. Now then, the rest is more clear. How can you demonstrate that this is a good solution? Of course, you have to be very thorough in showing and convincing others that what you did makes sense, right? Either through practical experiments, through simulations, through a nice mathematical proof, or whatever other method there is to show what you've done. But it's, of course, it's never enough to stop when you've found the solution. You actually have to communicate that solution and show that it is a good solution to others and not just to yourself. And then, okay, the remaining ones I'll not go into too much detail. That's more something where now if you're building a career, of course, you have to make sure that people care if you succeed. You have to make sure that you allocate this a sufficient amount of time. You don't tackle a task that's going to take you forever and the outcome is not worth the time you spend on it. But of course, now as a PhD student, you're just starting out. So hopefully your supervisor is going to help you with that as well. What's very critical also is read a lot. You have to really understand what's out there in the literature for various reasons. One important step, of course, is you have to understand what's out there to make sure you do something new. That seems obvious. But also it's invaluable as an idea guide. You start reading up on something and maybe then you realize that there are gaps in the paper, things aren't as easy as they seem. Once you dig a little deeper, you see what's still left open. So that is also a perfect way to get ideas. And that's something that I've seen many people stop doing that way too early, right? You've started your PhD, you found your problem, you think you understand it, you're working on your solution and you stop reading. That's a bad idea. Keep a little bit of time every week to read up on papers, look what others are doing. New stuff is coming, especially in computer science, new stuff is coming out all the time. And on the one hand side, to better shape your own research, and on the other hand, to defend that your research is actually novel, you need to read a lot. Do it all the time, read as much as you can. Now, the way you do research is critical. And again, this is something that's very easy to get wrong. Typically, what you should do is you make observations. Now, this is very generic, right? This works for any kind of research discipline. Physics is a very typical example. You make observations, you think of interesting questions to ask, you formulate a hypothesis, which means you formulate what is your conjecture based on these observations. What do you think will happen? And then you develop testable predictions, gather data to test those predictions, and then you refine, alter, expand, or reject your hypothesis. So the thing is basically, you do a thought experiment before you start. You think what you expect to come out, and only after that can you actually see if what you get from your simulations, from your experiments, actually corresponds to what you expected to happen. And the huge problem, if you don't do that, is that you get an outcome, right? Your routing algorithm, your MAC layer protocol, or whatever, it works, it does something, right? You hadn't thought about what you expected to do, so whatever comes out looks like, okay, let's try to understand a little bit what's happening. But the big problem with that is confirmation bias, right? You expect your routing protocol to work better than previous ones, so if that's the outcome, fantastic, you stop, you're done. Could be huge bugs in your code, but could be a fluke. That's just sort of this one specific scenario where you happen to be lucky. And this happens a lot, right? Because also, of course, you're under time pressure, you want things to work. And you have to be extremely careful with that. You have to constantly question your results, really dig deep and think about, is this really what should be happening? And if you stop too early, probably nobody will notice right away because few people really dig very deep into it, but you're basing your research on something that doesn't really make sense. And that is something that's very likely to bite you later on. So I can't stress this enough. Really take a very close look at the results you have. Beware of confirmation bias. Be very careful that it's not just wishful thinking and it just sort of worked by accident. And set the bar high. You never write an excellent paper by accident. So it's really something where if you aim to do very good research, it might turn out not to be that great and you get a mid-level paper out of it. Fair enough, that happens all the time. But if you don't set the bar high, you never by accident write a fantastic paper from a mediocre idea. Organization and time management are critical. So make a plan, ideally keep a research journal, write down what you did, why you did it, what worked, what didn't work. This is not paper writing, right? This can be sort of quick notes, but you'd be surprised how often you forgot what you did 2 weeks ago, let alone like 2 months ago. And suddenly you have the journal version of a research paper to write, and you can't really figure out where the simulations are and why exactly they work like this. And for these kind of things, a research journal, or at least sort of some notes that are ordered by time, are essential. Time management, again, it's a topic you could spend like a day seminar on. We don't have that time. Just very quickly. One thing that's super useful is to structure your tasks into important and not important, and urgent and not urgent. Now, what's totally obvious is do the urgent and important tasks first. That's clear. The not urgent and not important tasks you do last, or hopefully not at all. The next thing is where people typically get it wrong. You want to go to the urgent, not important tasks, right? Because they're urgent. Don't do it. Go to the important, not urgent tasks. Because the urgent, not important tasks, by definition, are not important. And what you want to make sure is that the important ones never become urgent. You kill the important tasks when they're not urgent, like a little bit before the deadline, not at the very last minute. Because if you do it at the very last minute, you might not have the information that you could have asked for a day earlier. You might not be able to ask the person who could have helped you, and so on and so on. There are a lot of things that can go wrong if you do things last minute, so try to avoid doing that. And of course, then the urgent, not important tasks, they would come after the not urgent, important tasks. And brief last thing, trust is the very core of science. So be very, very careful with research ethics. And that's not just plain fraud, which obviously you should never do. But again, also trying not to kid yourself. Be honest with yourself about your results and the limitations of the results you have. Reviewers often actually sort of value that, right? They get very suspicious. If a paper looks too good to be true, it probably is, right? So if you don't say what the limitations of your work are, it works here, it doesn't work there, and so on, that is not a good idea. And then, okay, careful with plagiarism, self-plagiarism, and so on and so on. Now also there are better and better tools to catch this, right? So it's not just that it's bad, but people will find out. And again, sort of, you have to trust the results of a researcher, because you don't want to go back and check every single little thing. So if you can't trust someone anymore, you're just not going to look at their research anymore, in which case whatever you do as a researcher becomes a little bit well, useless. Okay, so that's just a very brief run through through a topic that could be very, very long. In any case, we'll go more into the details in the panel, and I'll hand over to the next one with that slide.